Hello and welcome to the CPUC workshop on COVID impacts on customers in the energy sector. This is a two-day workshop beginning March 25th, ending March 26th. My name is Justin Fong, advisor to Commissioner Guzman-Aceves. And I'm going to run through a quick logistical slide presentation, and then I will hand it off to the Commissioner to make opening remarks. In order to participate as a WebEx participant, all attendees will be able to be muted and have video disabled. Additionally, if you do have Q&As, please enter them into the Q&A chat. The facilitators today will be Ben Menzies from the Energy Division. If you're unable to access this through a computer, a telephone and meeting number are also provided. And if you need technology help, I would ask that you please call 415-703-1070 or email Julie Lane at cpuc.ca.gov for more information. This meeting will be recorded and shared on the CPUC COVID website. For this proceeding, here is the link in the up right here. Attendees will automatically be muted. Q&A will follow each panel. Please use the WebEx Q&A feature and not the chat to ask questions of panelists or make comments on the panels. We will definitely address these, as many of these as we can, as the meeting time allows. And just a reminder, while working in teams this afternoon, please strive for an inclusive atmosphere of cooperation and good faith discussion. And if you did not receive an invitation to the WebEx event for your team this afternoon, please contact Julie Lane to receive access. And with that, I will go ahead and change the slides and turn this over to our commissioners for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Justin, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today and to be able to have this dialogue in such a timely manner. I want to really thank, in particular, all of the staff work that has gone into pulling this two-day workshop together. I also want to thank our local partner agencies that have come forward to share how they're dealing in real time with this continuation of responsiveness to our customers and their financial needs. And also want to thank our sister agencies and the opportunity to be able to really optimize all of the federal funding that has fortunately been allocated for this purpose. I hope that today's dialogue is a beginning and really informative to what we need to dig into over the next couple of months to make the most informed decision on our end. So thank you, and I know I'm missing many other people, but I just wanted to also maybe level set us, and we all know that many of our fellow Californians are still in need to transition out of this time, and fortunately the vaccination rates are continuing to improve, and yet still in our latest monthly reporting wanted to share that well over 3 million California customers in these IOU territories are still in arrears, and it's equating to well over $1 billion in that arrears debt. So we still have, even with the federal aid, we will still have a big chunk of necessity to continue to help our customers. So it's a big challenge, but this type of collaboration is really what's needed to try to address it. So thank you very much. And Commissioner Sharoma, I turn to you for some further opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Guzman-Aceves, and for the opportunity. Thank you for spearheading this rulemaking and workshop, and for inviting me to join today. I also want to thank all of the staff who organized this two-day workshop. Amy Mesrobian, Ben Menzies, Judge Watsaga, your advisor, Justin Fong. Over the last year, the Commission has taken an array of actions to support customers in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, ranging from ensuring continuity of service, ease of access to low-income programs, support for distance learning, and keeping energy contract workers employed. One of our most important actions was the moratorium on disconnections as customers struggled to pay bills due to workplace closures and other constraints of the COVID pandemic. And most recently, we've given direction to the utilities to prepare plans to transition customers out of the disconnection moratorium so that they understand the arrearage management plan options available to them pursuant to our disconnections decisions from last year to repay their bills. And that original decision has been very important as we, the utilities and customers, manage the activities over this next few months for what we know is over $1 billion in energy customer arrearages to manage. But we know that economic recovery will not be overnight, even as more and more people get vaccinated. Some businesses have closed forever, and it will take time for people to rebuild and pay back debt. Hence, it has been important for us to open this new order instituting rulemaking to explore any additional tools that we can provide for equitable customer relief. So thank you to the diverse stakeholder groups including the California publicly owned utilities, our sister agencies and consumer advocates joining today. Again, thank you to Commissioner Guzman-Aceves and her team putting together a very outstanding group of participants today. And for those who have tuned in, and tomorrow, I look forward overall to hearing the proposals to address what else can we do to address the COVID-19 related arrearages and the circumstances that our residential and business customers are experiencing as we continue to cope with the pandemic. So thank you, Commissioner, and the microphone is back to you.
Thank you. And maybe it's back to Justin for our first panel.
I believe so. Thank you, Commissioner. So our first panel today will be, give me a second to start this. It'll be the first session will be panel discussion of considerations for program design and implementation, facilitated by Ben Menzies.
All right, and thank you, Justin, and thank you to all of our participants and attendees today. As Justin said, we have our first session of the day now, and in this session, a panel of experts on implementing utility customer assistance will present on the experiences of their organizations in implementing or considering whether to implement customer relief programs to help customers struggling to pay bills due to COVID-19. We have three organizations that we are excited to have joining us this morning, as well as one additional speaker. I will introduce each organization briefly here before moving to each of them to present in turn. After our last panelist has finished presenting, I will ask Julie if there are any questions from workshop attendees for our panelists to answer, but I'll first go to our representatives from commissioners' offices to see if they have any questions. With us today, we have George Rafael, who's Director of Customer Service at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. We have Kim Riccolo, Manager of Residential and Assistance Delivery, and Jeffrey Fehler, who's a Supervisor in Residential and Assistance Delivery for the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. And we have Samantha Weaver, who's Program Manager for Connected Communities at East Bay Community Energy. And finally, we have Elliot Nethercut, who is a Principal Researcher for the National Regulatory Research Institute. So with that, I will turn it over to George Rafael, Director of Customer Service with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, for our first presentation of the day.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I was just going to cover we had the opportunity to utilize some CARES funds late last year to launch some customer assistance program. And if we can go to the next slide, what I was hoping to cover today is just, provide an overview of the program that we launched, some of the customer outreach and community-based organization engagement that we had, and then the results with the customer participation and some of the ancillary results that we had with the program. If we can go to the next slide. So the City of Los Angeles had received a substantial amount in CARES funding for the year, and a lot of that was initially targeted for infrastructure and emergency response and so on. And in late September, we had been in communications with the City Council and so on, and we had the opportunity to assist customers with their bill arrears. They had increased significantly. There was a previous rental assistance program that really took off and was a huge benefit to customers. And the next element was trying to assist customers with their various bills. So we were in discussions there was about $50 million or up to $50 million that was allotted to assist us, where we could assist customers with actually, if we can go to the previous slide still, please, sorry. So we were looking at a cap of $50 million and to see how we can best distribute this to our customers that were having some financial challenges. So the initial thought we would be applying this directly to arrears for customers' bills for water and power. And we actually we provide water and power, but we also bill for the city for sewer and sanitation also, which on a normal bill where they have all the services, it usually comes out to about 50%, about 60% water and power, and the rest is sewer and sanitation. And then that ratio switches dramatically for those that are in multifamily dwellings, where it's primarily then electric and sanitation. Electric is usually the majority. But as we were kind of getting into this and starting to set up the program, it was then identified that the CARES funds, we couldn't have that, they couldn't be applied directly for revenue, to cover revenue loss for a government agency. So with that, we had to then switch gears. So instead of applying this and setting up a program that we would be applying it to customers' bills that would be applying, we had to see what else we could do. And we're just realizing customers with, their various utilities, not only ours, but with telephone bills, cell service, broadband, and so on, that we could still provide it and do it as a general utility grant. So we shifted then from applying it to the bills to issuing a check for customers. So with that, we're trying to get the most outreach, but also want to make sure that it's an effective amount. So we started looking at the average bills for our customers and realizing, an average residential customer with all the services has typically about a $450 bill for every 2 months. So in that we were identified that, we targeted to, beyond that analysis to make it a round number, we looked at providing a check basically for $500. That would be for utilities and providing it to customers. But we needed to narrow that down and we want to make sure we're helping those that were really in need. So we had about 210,000 customers that are on financial assistance programs, what we call our low income discount program and Lifeline and life support discounts. So, but realizing that a lot of the customers now are facing challenges, financial challenges that they didn't previously. And so we didn't want to exclude those, but they may not be able to have, at that point, when we're talking late in the year, to qualify for the programs yet. So we decided on having a self-attestation where customers, either if they're enrolled in the program or if they self-attest that they're based on their current financial situation, they would qualify for one of those programs. And so that was the primary criteria. But then the second element, due to the CARES funds, we had to ensure that this was based on a COVID, that they were impacted by the pandemic. And so with that, we needed some very specific documentation, whether it was job loss, income loss, taking care of family members who were ill, child care, and so on. So with that, we set up the criteria and various documentation that they would need to submit. And just given that this was federal funding and so on, we had to ensure that it was auditable, that we could basically, live up to the guidelines that were laid out by the federal government, and that it wouldn't lead to any issues. So with that, we did need to have customers submit that type of documentation. But realizing a lot of folks, that could, had job losses or whatnot, they could be self-employed, working for smaller companies, so they wouldn't necessarily have, the facility to have like things on letterhead, all the, proper documentation and so on. So we did want to ensure that they weren't going to be excluded from this. So we did include a self-attestation form where customers could then self-attest that they have been impacted and explain how and why. And so with that, then another element that was laid out was that, based on the federal guidelines, the funds had to be expended before the end of the calendar year. So given the start time that we really had a short time period. We would have to go through city council approval of the programs and our board of water and power commissioners and so on. So we realized, we're looking at a very short timeline to really get this out. And given the manual review that we would have, or actually we weren't going to be able to have the time to set up anything automated and so on. But we would have to do this electronically. So we set it up where customers would be submitting this through online, which traditionally we don't do that. We try to give options to customers, whether it's doing it online, mailing it in, submitting it in person. But given the situation and the timeline, that wasn't going to be an option this time. So we did have to require that it be submitted online to our customers or through our website. And then we would be doing some manual reviews with this. And we would have to we expected, based on the previous rental assistance programs, that the demand was huge. They got, it was really flooded the first day. So we thought we would be, it would be a huge demand coming in right off the bat. So we had to really invest in our infrastructure on our website so that it can handle this. And then we were going to have folks reassigned from normal functions to be able to review all the applications in a really short window. So we had 100 people from our contact center reassigned to strictly focus on, reviewing the applications and coming in. So, which affected our call wait time significantly. We went from, average of under 2 minutes to well over 30 minutes during this period, which, posed some problems with, customers calling with questions and so on. But we were trying to balance that out with pushing out more information. And as we were kind of going through the program, we realized that became even more critical, was being able to get that information out there quickly and to the right customers. So with that, we laid it out, basically a $500 grant program for utilities. It would be online, and we had to narrow the window down. So basically, after all the approvals and getting everything set up, we had to limit the period for about 3 weeks. So it went from November 2nd to the 22nd for customers to submit online, which then made it, the key element was the program outreach. If we can go to the next slide, please. So with that, we anticipated initially, that if once the word gets out, it would, just based on previous programs, it would really be coming, there would be a flood of applications and, demand. So we took, we did a little bit of earned media, some press releases at the beginning. We really tried to partner up with the community-based organizations. We had briefed them, got their input onto the design of the program, and really try to partner with them to be able to get the word out to the communities. We also realized with an online-only application, the challenge, some customers may not have the facilities or the access to it, or some challenges being able to do this. So we really tried to partner with them to provide that assistance for customers. And as we launched the program, what we didn't realize was there's so much information that was going out to customers at this time trying to go through press releases and just trying to through the newspapers and so on wasn't enough. We actually didn't have that huge surge at the beginning, which then really realized, well, we needed to do a lot more targeted, that customers were just flooded with information. So we needed to target it specifically and get that out to customers. And then we started going through a wave of direct emails to all our residential customers. We ramped up, the participation with this, getting information and collateral out to the CBOs to get it out to their customer groups. And then some partners.
Excuse me, George, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do have to do a quick time check. So we are coming up on 10 minutes.
Sorry. Okay.
So happy to let you finish up.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. So basically just the various waves of communication, and we continued throughout. We had daily check-ins with the community-based organizations to make sure that we were getting some feedback and what was going on, make adjustments and so on, which was really helpful and very key for us to make these adjustments on the fly. If we can go to the next slide. So this was just a quick summary of the different elements for the customer outreach, everything from earned media to social media, direct mailers, and some paid advertisement. If we can go to the next slide, please. So one thing that we did learn is at the beginning, our direct communications and things that we were pushing out was a little bit more generic. And part of this was efforts from we promoted LADWP cares rather than really getting to what it is that would be, what the benefit is directly for our customers. So realized that was with all the flood of information that was going out to various groups and customers, it wasn't direct enough. So we shifted to the items on the right and just basically really just promoted, hey, it's $500 to be able to assist customers, got to the point right off the bat, which was a huge benefit. We saw a huge spike in participation at that point. The next slide, please. So as I mentioned, a key element in this was the feedback loop and working with the customer community-based organizations to do this. We had daily check-ins to get that feedback, really engage with them at the beginning and then throughout, and with our lessons learned, which was very helpful for future programs that we're looking at. If we can look at next slide. So just a quick recap on our results. We were targeting basically with the $500 and the $50 million cap, 100,000 customers. The applications we ended up receiving was a little over 80,000. And based on the reviews and everything, we ended up with, we filtered out duplicate applications, which was around 5,500. So we ended up with about 67,000 applications that were accepted. Which was a pretty good rate. About 88% of the applications were accepted. And we're continuing mailers, given that it was a check mailed to customers. We're sending, monthly reminders for them to cash it and so on, which is, so we're, and we also started a reissue for those that got lost in the mail and so on. But so far, if we can go to the next slide, please. Just some of the quick results, as far as that, one of the things that really helped was just given that it was online, it really got customers enrolling and registering on our website. We've got about 60% of our customers that were previously enrolled on our website. Another 43,000 joined, which really then exposed them to other programs and services that we offer for assistance. Also, discount applications, we saw it went from, we had about 210,000 that were enrolled. 46,000 came over in about a 3-week period to apply for those programs, which was also a great help to get these customers, that additional assistance. If we can go to the next slide. We also did some surveys with our customers who participated in this, and then those who would qualify who didn't participate. So just, it turned out the website was not, for those who were accepted, it was not a problem. They were easy to understand. And they would definitely recommend it to others, which was a huge mark for us that they, did see benefit and would be applicable to their neighbors and family and friends. A small segment did have some issues with, and it was mostly with the upload of documentation and so on. So we're working on that to figure out how we can facilitate that for any future programs. And lastly was just those who didn't qualify or did not apply that would have qualified. It was just mainly not knowing how to apply, and that they just, it wasn't necessarily what we were pleased with. It wasn't necessarily the application process or the website. That was a smaller segment than we anticipated. It was just really kind of being aware of it and knowing what to do and how to do it. So sorry for running along there, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, George. And thank you for the information. Next, we have our second presentation, which is from Kim Riccolo and Jeffrey Feller from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Kim and Jeffrey, whenever you're ready.
Hi there, Kim Riccolo, manager for our residential and assistance delivery group, and Jeff is here with me as well. I'll be presenting and then leaning on him for any help that I need. So we're going to quickly just go through some of the program changes that we've done, some of the outreach that we've done to help our arrearages, and talk you through what we've been exploring with regards to our debt assistance and some details there. All right, next slide, please. So this is just a quick thing of some of the things that we've been doing. We have aligned our non-disconnects with what the CPUC decision is. That was fairly recent. We are also doing no late fees. A couple of things I want to just point out here is one of the things that we have done, we've adjusted our income guidelines during this pandemic to make it easier for customers to apply. But more importantly, we've already put the technology in place to remove our late fees permanently. In doing our research on these customers and looking at their energy burden, we had identified that the late fees, the disconnection fees, the reconnection fees were really causing what we're calling a hidden bill burden, and we felt like that was adding to their struggle. So once the pandemic, or once we start disconnecting customers, we will no longer have late fees for those customers that are participating in our energy assistance program rate, or which we call EPR, very similar to the CARE discount. We have also implemented flexible payment arrangements. We went from payment arrangements from 4 to 6 months. To our low-income customers, we're actually offering them 24 months. So you're probably thinking, well, why? Why did you go with 24 months? Well, some of these arrearages are so large because they haven't paid in so long that a 12-month payment plan was not going to work. These people struggle to make their bills every month anyway, and adding, let's say they owe $2,000 for the last 12 months. It's an additional $167 on top of their already existing Smud bill. So it just wasn't going to work. So we've extended that to 24 months. We are also promoting Heap and other bill assistance across channels, and not probably any different than any of the other utilities. We're trying to get customers out there to really enroll in these programs we've done some data shares, we're doing direct mails, we're doing calls, anything we can to get out there and get them enrolling in some of these assistance programs. And just recently we met with our Heap partner at CRP, and we've decided we need to change that message to be a little stronger, kind of more of a call to action, because they're still not seeing, at least in our area, the applications that we would normally see, and so we're trying to help there. All right, next slide, please. The other thing I'd like to share is we've really bumped up our outreach. We really want customers to know about all the programs, similar to what LADWP just presented. It's really important to get the message out there in any way that we can. So you can see we've done lots of presentations. We've met with a lot of different organizations. We've done a lot of direct mail, email, social media with all of the programs that we offer. We actually did communication to our previously denied EPR customers that had maybe not qualified before because we'd loosened up the qualifications. We really wanted them to know and invite them back to say, hey, this is a program that can help you. With some of the data share that we've done with our Heap partner, who's Community Resource Project, is for those customers with, kind of high bills or high usage, they would be a perfect applicant for Heap. So we've helped them to be able to reach out to our customers. The other thing that we've done, and we're really proud of, is we worked with the school districts to distribute our message through their free lunches that were being distributed at the schools where people would drive through. So we provided a handout so that they would know that they could apply for this or use these programs as well. So we did that. We've reached out to lots of social service organizations and continued with some of our sponsorships with virtual and networking. The one thing that we've done probably differently as well, LADWP spoke about kind of reaching out to some different organizations. That was us too. We've reached out to organizations that aren't necessarily considered low income and that we've not ever reached out to before. And the reason for that is we have a whole new customer base that's been impacted by this pandemic and COVID. And so we wanted to make sure that those folks that maybe don't think of assistance programs, that they were contacted and reached out to as well. And we're continuing that, and we'll continue in that, including some friendly call campaigns and stuff that our contact center is doing. All right, next slide, please. So at first you're like, well, what does virtual assessments have for reducing debt and reducing and helping with kind of that debt assistance or those arrearages? Actually, this was kind of a surprise to us as well. We started out with what we call virtual energy education, and we prioritize kind of those high usage customers. It wasn't a call to have, for the customer to pay. It was really like, hey, we're here to help. Similar to the rest of our messages, right? We're here to help. But hey, we understand that you have kids at home, that you're maybe remote working, that your bill is probably going to be higher than normal. We really want to just help you to reduce your costs and help you long term. So we provided personal energy education and tips for those customers. We did that. We've done about 1,200 since April. Customers are overwhelmingly responding positively to that, and it is reducing their overall costs. We're also, because we're not able to get out in the field, we also are doing virtual energy assessments similar to the education, but now we're identifying, okay, this customer may need some weatherization improvements or some other deficiencies or measures that could be installed. So we really relied on our contractors to help us fill the gap of what our specialists used to do in the field, and then handing that off to the contractor, and stepped up our QA to ensure that it was doing it. But the same thing here, we're seeing an increase in customer satisfaction and their experience, and customers are definitely seeing a reduction in their overall energy costs and helping them long term. So we're super excited about these two programs and how they're helping us to reduce those arrearages or the future arrearages as well. And things that we're finding, like improperly utilized thermostats, slab leaks, non-functioning refrigerators, all kinds of things, and the customers are just responding to it quite well. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the comments that some of these customers have said to us for all the different things that we're doing. Thank you for reaching out to me. I had no idea there was a program that could do so much for me. Can you please call my daughter too? You're calling to help me with all that's happening. You can't even be at work yourself. Thank you. So lots of different things. There's a couple other comments here from what we call our energy help recipients. These are customers that receive assistance that are typically in danger of being disconnected or disconnected, that other customers donate to. But we started a manual process of reaching out to these customers because nobody's being disconnected right now. So we changed our rules a little bit to help with these customers as well. All right, next slide, please. And the last thing I'd like to share with you is kind of exploring debt assistance. And it's a tough nut to crack that all of us are struggling with, right? What is the right assistance? How do we help these customers? Because these arrearages are so high, it becomes so overwhelming. And what we don't want is we don't want customers to walk away. So what is our problem statement at Smud? Well, there's a large number of overdue accounts that continue to remain outstanding while disconnections are on hold. Of these, 15% are our low income or our EPR customers, and an additional 12% are what we call our small and medium businesses, SMB. So those are your smaller, some of the restaurants, some of the mom and pops, the nail salons, hair salons, those types of things. So both SMB and EPR are two of the segments that have a disproportionate amount of arrearages and that have been impacted by the pandemic and really face uncertainty, just like we all know, right? The on again, off again with the restrictions has really impacted our SMB customers and really our low income and some of our regular market rate or residential customers that maybe don't know they qualify for some of these programs have been impacted pretty heavily. So the other thing that we wanted to look at is both have considerably large dunning balances, and more than that, a very large percentage sit in what we call the 120 days or more. So they have a 120 days or more past due, and that's continuing to grow. And then the other thing is residential customers are not on low income, but we know probably qualify and are continuing to struggle. What do we do? So this is what we've kind of looked at so far. We want to find a balance with helping our customers, but not really putting the cost on the rest of our customers, which, is kind of a tough nut to crack. So we looked at what everybody else is doing out there. We're looking at what the CPUC it has been covering with the IOUs, right? But we're seeing one-time credits. We're seeing flat or up to amounts. We're seeing less than $1,000 credits is usually what we're seeing. We're seeing what the IOUs are now doing, or what CPUC has been instrumental in, is the arrearage management plan. Is that something we want to do? I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with LADWP and their explanation of that. So what are you guys thinking about? So a lot of things to consider as we try to crack this nut. So the other thing that we did is then okay, well, what is the data telling us? What are the number of households and by segment? And I shared some of those percentages. What are their average balances? What were they pre-pandemic? What are they post-pandemic? And really, what is that 120 days looking like, and what do we need to do? That's the piece that we're really concerned about, because those customers are most likely to walk away, right? Which is not good for us. It's not good for them. They're just in a panic trying to figure out how they're going to pay this overwhelming bill. So we've looked. Go ahead.
Sorry, break in, Kim, but this is your time warning.
Okay, I'm almost there. I'll wrap it up for you. So we looked at all of these things. So what are we going to do? Our plan is going to be simple and easy to explain by CSRs. That's kind of our main criteria. We don't want it too complicated for our customers or for our CSRs to be able to explain. And we've considered the idea of auto-enrolling in some kind of a payment plan or something like that. However, that really takes the control out of the hands of the customer, and for some customers that may not work. We're leaning towards a credit based on impact, but may also go with something that removes the balance temporarily if good payments continue and can be forgiven that way, which I know are some of the areas that some of the other utilities are looking at. However, the other thing we want to keep in mind is that some of these customers have always struggled to pay, and so setting them up on a payment plan may not be the right answer. So maybe just forgiving the debt or whatever. And so then you have all the assistance programs coming in on top of it. So we were ready to present to our executives a recommendation of what we were going to go forward with, and then all of a sudden we start getting calls on the SARA program, which is Sacramento Emergency Rental Assistance, which is the Sacramento version of the Emergency Rental Assistance. Heap's gotten additional funding. We got contacted by one of the cities in our area, and we're like, whoa, hold the buses. We probably need to get an idea of how much financial assistance is going to come in and help with those arrearages before we come up with a final plan. So although we're our disconnections won't start by until June. Probably the soonest, and we haven't landed on a date on that yet, of our disconnections won't actually happen, even though we'll start the process till about September, October. So we've got a little more time probably than what the CPUC is looking at with the IOUs. But our next step is really to take all of this into consideration and come up with recommendations that takes all that financial assistance that's occurring and marry that with a program that will work in our area for our Smud customers that is designed in not a one size fits all, but meets all of the different segments needs. And I think I about got it. Hopefully that covers it, and I look forward to questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Kim. Before I move on to our next panelist, I wanted to flag that attendees should use the Q&A function in WebEx to ask any questions you have for the panelists. And we will try to take a couple of verbal questions at the end of the panel, time permitting. But I did see that George from LADWP is already answering a couple of those questions that we've gotten, which is awesome. Definitely encourage that. Next up, we have Samantha Weaver from East Bay Community Energy. Samantha, go ahead whenever you are ready.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. Can you give me a thumbs up, Ben, if you can hear me? Okay, just always have to check. Well, as Ben said, I'm Samantha Weaver. I'm the program manager newly for our Connected Communities pilot program. And what I hope to do in the next 10 minutes is give a quick overview of what this program is and share some lessons we've learned so far. If you could go to the next slide, please. So by way of introduction, the Connected Communities pilot was something we started designing back in 2019. So this is a pre-COVID effort. And this is when we learned that back in 2019 that there are a number of zip codes in EBCE service area that have higher than average disconnection rates. And the goal here was to reduce the number of disconnections and arrears in some of our most vulnerable communities. In terms of the objectives, what we initially were looking to do here was to build partnerships with community-based organizations to identify what works. So the objective here is to test different solutions and help us identify best practices, ultimately to get to identify what's scalable. So we're looking for a small scale solution that helps us think about, what would this look like on a larger scale? A couple notes on the program design here. So what we're doing is we're looking at multiple interventions, and that's because we think there's unlikely to be a one size fits all solution or a silver bullet here. We're relying on both quantitative and qualitative analysis, which means we're doing data analysis, but we're also holding focus groups with actual customers. And then finally, we plan to evaluate the program design to understand what works in the end. I also wanted to share some of the underlying principles that kind of guide us as we've designed this pilot. The first one is know your customers and meet them where they are. So that means understand where and why disconnections are happening and partner with organizations that are trusted in these communities to find hard to reach customers and get them enrolled in programs for which they qualify. Related to all of that is we're looking here to leverage existing programs for the most part. You'll see when I talk about the interventions we're testing here that, we're really leveraging existing CPUC programs, and we don't feel the need, at least not yet, to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot out there that, we think we can work on already. And then finally, we're looking to make data-driven decisions and evaluations of program success. You could go to the next slide, please. So here's kind of a visual representation of the pilot as an overview. And the basic idea here is that at EBCE, we have access to data sets, to information, to marketing materials, to staff time that we can use to help us refer customers to community-based organizations who can help them enroll in programs for which they might be eligible. So the way this is structured is we've got sort of our EBCE contributions in terms of data, marketing, staff time, hopefully doing some analysis to segment customers to the extent we can and to whatever level of granularity we can, and then working with partner organizations on targeted outreach, and also providing funding in all instances for outreach and for other forms of partnership. Is an example of how this works in practice. I'll mention, our Care and FARA outreach pilot shown here in blue. The way this worked was we started by analyzing some census data. And what we did is look at the percentage of customers who, based on income in a given census tract, should qualify for Care or FARA, and compared that to the percentage that were actually enrolled. And, we would expect that those things would roughly match up. Which was true for the most part. However, we did identify a number of census tracts where there was a gap, and that's where we partnered with Interfaith Power and Light and Spectrum Community Services to target outreach to those census tracts where we thought that gap existed. So that's one example of an intervention. The additional interventions we're looking at here, and I'll note these are all PUC programs, again, are the Arrearage Management Plan, which is new, and we can talk about that more later. The Grid Alternatives administered DAC-SASH program. Here we're partnering with Grid on outreach and also providing gap funding to sort of bridge the gap between any available incentives and the cost of the solar system, plus any necessary panel upgrades. So the idea is customers participating here would get a free system. And then finally, EBCE plans to be a program administrator for the DAC and Community Solar Green Tariff program, and plans to work with community sponsors there. And this is the program that provides participating customers with a 20% discount. If you go to the next slide, please. So in 2020 and 2021, EBCE added 3 additional activities under this broader umbrella. These include facilitating focus groups through a partnership with an organization called EJ Solutions. We also are developing a disconnections propensity model to better understand where and why customers get disconnected, and to help improve our future outreach. And then last but not least, we are working with UC Berkeley to design a program evaluation study for us to use to better understand how each of these interventions worked or didn't work, and to inform what the next steps look like for us. The other thing I should mention about what's happened in 2021 is that we've dedicated a full-time staff person to this effort. That person is me. So as of March 2021, I'll be continuing to make sure that all of these pieces move forward. If you could go to the next slide, please. So here's a picture of all of the Connected Communities umbrella initiatives on one page. We've got our 4 interventions I walked through at the top, as well as the focus groups and the propensity model and our program evaluation efforts that we initiated this year. In terms of status, each of these are in various stages of development or in progress. The 2 I want to highlight are the Care and FARA outreach pilot in blue and the focus groups in green, and that's because each of these have been completed or wrapped up so far. On the outreach pilot, this was an initiative that was heavily impacted by the COVID pandemic. Our outreach efforts here coincided essentially with the pandemic itself. Despite the shutdown, we were able to enroll about 100 customers, and we're evaluating the next steps there. On the focus group side, this just wrapped up, and we conducted 9 virtually held focus groups in 4 languages. We're expecting a final report early next month, and again, we hope that that report will inform our future program design as well as any additional interventions. And again, each of these initiatives will funnel into a broader evaluation that'll inform our next steps. If you could go to the next slide, please. So all that said, while this is still in progress, there are some lessons learned so far that I thought would be helpful to share with this group, because later today, you'll be talking, I think, in depth about how to design programs to help customers facing arrears. So these kind of fall into 3 buckets: program evaluation, outreach, and program design. On the program evaluation side of things, one word of caution I wanted to share is that it may make sense to avoid evaluating success based on reduced arrears. And I say that because EBCE did some internal analysis of customer arrearages during the pandemic that showed that discount programs like CARE have a marginal impact on arrears. And I want to be very clear and say that this does not mean that CARE doesn't work. What it does mean, and what our focus group findings suggest, is that customers are using these savings from CARE to pay for other bills. So what customers indicated in focus groups has been that they've been using sort of a rotating triage method of bill payment, and they're having to devote their income to things like rent and groceries. So if you look at arrears in a vacuum, it may appear as though CARE is not having an impact, but of course these things don't exist in a vacuum. So it's just a word of caution there about the evaluation approach. Secondly, on outreach, know when to call a community organizer. This is sort of a cue for me to explain an anecdote about our focus group experience, which is that we were looking to hold a focus group in Vietnamese and used our usual outreach channels to recruit participants for that, and just failed abysmally. I think we got no interest or no participants, to the extent that we thought we'd have to cancel the focus group. Luckily, our partners with EJ Solutions had a contact who is a community organizer in the Vietnamese community, and who was able to recruit some folks to participate. And we were ultimately able to hold that workshop. So I think this underscores a couple things. One, make sure to build this kind of outreach into your budgeting and your timeline and your partnership plans. And I think, again, it just highlights the importance of focus groups and the difficulty in structuring those. Third.
Hey, Samantha, just real quick, this is your time check.
Thank you. I'm almost done.
Perfect.
Third, avoid unintended consequences by talking to customers directly. This is another finding from focus groups that was meaningful to us that, again, we wanted to share. Last but not least, I want to mention that the definition of low income or of poverty that we use for these programs is really important and makes a huge difference in terms of eligibility. And specifically, I want to call out, one challenge we're anticipating, which is that the way our program is currently designed, there are limited interventions available for customers who may be facing disconnections and or arrearages, but who do not live in a top 25% CalEnviro disadvantaged community, or who may not quite qualify for CARE or FARA. So, the recommendation we have here is to think about ways to expand eligibility, including by refining the definition of low income to be consistent with the low income definition used in the affordable housing world, which relies on area median income, whereas CARE relies on the federal poverty level as a kind of a benchmark. So to wrap things up again, to conclude, we're continuing to work on this initiative, and we hope to be able to share additional information as it progresses. So I'm happy to take any questions and follow-ups later today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Samantha. And next, for our final presentation of this panel, we have Elliot Nethercut of the National Regulatory Research Institute. And I'll turn it over to Elliot now.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ben. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, just let me know when we're running short on time, and I'll cut it short. But I do appreciate the opportunity to be included on this webinar and really in this workshop. And you've heard from the other panelists on California-specific programs and responses, but my presentation and remarks will sort of provide a higher level perspective on some regulatory trends across the country, including some examples of state responses that might be useful and informative as California deliberates on the sort of mid to long range impacts of the pandemic. But just to provide some quick background, a little over a year ago, really on the onset of the pandemic, former NARUC President Brandon Presley asked NRI to begin tracking and reporting on how each commission was responding to the pandemic throughout the country. So it began as a single web page with a simple table, and it's pretty much evolved into a broad set of tools. And really the goal here is to share information to help regulators sort of learn how other states are responding to the pandemic, and hopefully that the information will be useful. On to the next slide, just a background here, looking at where we started. This is sort of the initial responses during the onset of the pandemic. And I think where each state began is critical in determining how they proceed today regarding sort of regulatory assets and total arrearages and other cost recovery issues. So initially you see 25 states plus the District of Columbia move quite quickly during the beginning of the pandemic to introduce orders, mostly by commissions and governors, to temporarily suspend disconnections. And these were mostly directed at electric utilities, but in many cases it included gas and water, and in some cases telecom. So we should also recognize that many commissions are sometimes limited in their regulatory reach and can often not impact municipals or cooperatives. So in some cases, this is where governors and state legislatures have instituted orders or directives, and in some cases there's been legislative action that can go beyond that authority of a commission. And Alaska, New York, and Virginia were all states that enacted separate legislation to prevent utility shutoffs. California, more recently in September, had some unique legislation to authorize the CPUC to approve securitization of revenue shortfalls associated with pandemic impacts. But a majority of the moratoriums, however, were directed directly by commissions. And one of the things that's really clear to me since the beginning of the pandemic is really the wide range of collaboration and creativity that the various authorities have taken to balance the needs of customers as well as the financial health of the utilities they regulate. I'm not going to go into specific examples. I will suggest taking a look at Washington State. Texas also had a relief program for low-income customers that they repurposed for really for the pandemic specific impacts. That really involved like a rider that was something like 33 cents per megawatt hour and applied to customers throughout the ERCOT footprint. So that relief program ultimately protected over 600,000 low-income customers from disconnections. As for the other 25 states that did not introduce moratoriums, there were a large majority of utilities that did voluntarily suspend cutting service. And then the three states there, Virginia, Vermont, and Texas, at one point had moratoriums that expired, and then they subsequently reinstated them. So we can move to the next slide here. So let's talk a little bit about where we stand today at the national level. You can see that there are 14 states with active moratoriums, and that includes California. And then for the 20 states that are in yellow, nearly all these commissions with expired moratoriums have attempted to create some sort of a soft landing for customers by requiring utilities that they regulate to offer repayment plans, and these can range from 6 months up to 3 years. So most commissions are also requiring utilities to reduce late fees, reconnection fees, and other penalties to help alleviate and encourage customers to make the appropriate arrangements. So, many commissions have also suspended deposits. That's a really important one that we've seen across the country. Suspending deposits throughout the country and using existing deposits to pay off outstanding balances. One more important consideration is that the 35 of the commissions throughout the country, including California, do not allow disconnections during the winter months. And these requirements for various programs do differ, but that is an important consideration, as many states have sort of aligned the expiration of their COVID-19 related moratoriums to align with the start dates of the winter moratoriums.
And hey, Elliot,
finally,
this is your 1 minute warning.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. I'll wrap it up here. We can go to the next slide then. Okay, so this is just another sort of a high-level summary of where we stand in terms of cost recovery. And as you can see, almost all the states that issued moratoriums did also require the tracking of costs. And what's going to be more important, throughout the next year as we sort of emerge from the pandemic is commissions and their staff across the country will have some very complicated decisions, and that'll involve really two high-level topics. The first is how are costs collected, and specifically what constitutes a utility expense that's directly related to the pandemic versus business as usual. So really what qualifies as a COVID-19 regulatory asset expense. There's also reporting requirements. It's critical that commissions and their staff really focus on data and really collecting and maintaining comprehensive data so they can examine and evaluate sort of baseline before the pandemic versus where we are after the pandemic and coming through it. The second issue is really related to the level of cost recovery that should be allowed. So, should there be a partial or total cost recovery for utilities? And if it's an IOU, should the unamortized balance of the COVID-19 costs earn a rate of return for shareholders? And finally, commissions will need to determine whether pandemic-related costs should be included in the utilities general rate case or through some other proceeding. Go to the next slide, please. I'm going to wrap up right now. I won't go into the detail on federal programs because I understand that's going to be covered later today. But I will just say that, the commissioners in their opening remarks, they mentioned that California does have arrearages that have certainly increased during the pandemic, and California is certainly not alone here. You can look at Colorado, where around 20 to 25% of residential customers are behind by an average of $331. In North Carolina, you have 650,000 households that are behind on their utility bills, and in New Jersey, 700 million are owed to various utilities. So this is not, of course, this is a nationwide challenge. And going forward, I think I'll just end by saying that outreach is a really important factor here. And I think, I applaud Smud and LADWP and EBCE as well as other utilities that are making customer outreach a priority, because of course, if the customer is not aware of the various programs, they're not going to be effective. So I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Elliot. Now that we've had all of our panelists present, we'll move to a very short Q&A session for our panelists. And in a moment, I'm going to ask my colleague, Julie Lane I'm going to ask Justin to promote someone who asked one of the questions. But first, I'm going to turn to the commissioners' offices that are present to see if they have any questions for our panelists. Any commissioners' offices with questions you'd like to ask? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move to one question from the Q&A, and if you're able, Justin, are you able to promote the person?
Yes, Ben, I'm able to promote the person if they would like to panelist. I would just first and last name. If they call in from a number, it might be a little bit harder, but let's just try this.
Okay.
Yes, Connie Cho is available. Connie, can you speak up? I believe we've activated your unmute. Connie, can you hear us?
I'm clicking on Connie's attendee right now. I'm unable to actually add her as a panelist for some reason.
Julie, would you mind just reading?
Okay, I'd be happy to ask Connie Cho. She asked, what does Walkaway mean for Smud?
There we go. I was having trouble unmuting. It doesn't like unmuting. Sorry, I guess I should have explained that. Walking away means literally the customer moves out and walks away from that. From a regular residential or low income, sometimes those bills get so high, they'll just move out to close out their account, and they'll go move in with somebody else or go into another address under a different name or a different person in the household to avoid that arrearage. And with our small commercial customers, literally they're just shutting down their doors, right? They're shutting down their doors. They can't do the arrearage anymore, so they walk away. So the bottom line is, the larger the arrearage, the bigger chance of somebody doing that. And once they do that, then it goes through our write-off process or our collection process to try to get those funds back. But the chances of us getting that back is pretty slim. Hope that helps.
Thank you for that, Kim. And thank you to all of our panelists for these extremely informative presentations this morning. This was an awesome way to start off the day, and we really appreciate all of you for spending some time with us this morning. Now we're going to move on to our second session of the day. In this session, we're fortunate enough to have representatives from both the California Department of Community Services and Development and the California Department of Housing and Community Development, who will share some information on the federal funds their departments are overseeing currently for utility debt relief. First, from the Department of Community Services and Development, we have Kathy Andre, Deputy Director for Energy and Environmental Services, who will provide an overview of CSD's Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP. And we only have Kathy until her hard stop at 11 o'clock. So we're going to allow Q&A to go until she has to leave at 11. At that point, we will turn to Kristen Haney from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, who will provide a brief overview of the programs HCD is currently overseeing. So with that, I will turn to Kathy for our first presentation in this session.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to participate in the workshop today. As you know, my presentation will provide a brief overview of CSD and inform on the resources available through the Federal Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. We refer to it as LIHEAP, and how LIHEAP can address the low income households in meeting their energy needs. Next slide. So the Department of Community Services, CSD, is a state department under the California Health and Human Services Agency. Our mission is to reduce poverty by leading the development of, in coordination of effective and innovative programs for low-income Californians. CSD oversees a variety of programs. We oversee the LIHEAP program. We also oversee the Department of Energy Weatherization Assistance Program, and a state-funded low-income weatherization program. Also, which is not on the slide, is we oversee the Community Services Block Grant. My focus today is on the LIHEAP program to inform participants of the LIHEAP funding allocation and availability, provide parameters of the LIHEAP Utility Assistance Program, in ways that LIHEAP can assist customers that are facing the arrearages. Slide 3. Next slide. Thank you. So LIHEAP provides an array of services to help low-income families better manage the financial burdens of home energy and to overcome energy-related emergencies. So LIHEAP provides the utility bill assistance. We also provide weatherization services to help improve the energy efficiency of low-income household homes. We provide emergency services to such as repairing heating and cooling systems. We provide emergency preparedness education services. We also recently implemented the ability to provide battery-powered backup devices to minimize the impact of the public safety power shutoffs. And we have other related emergency services to help protect the health and safety of low-income households. So how does CSD deliver these services? We work with an existing network of about 41 nonprofit and government organizations throughout the state, who provide the LIHEAP services directly to low-income households within their respective service area. The service area is primarily by county, with the exception of Los Angeles and San Diego, where the service area boundary is defined by the zip codes. Next slide. So how does funding flow to CSD? CSD receives annual LIHEAP funding from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and I'll refer to them as HHS in this presentation. And to give you a perspective of the funding levels, in federal fiscal year 2020, HHS released $3.74 billion nationally, and our share was $205 million in California. In 2020, we also received CARES Act funding in the amount of $49.5 million in California. And most recently, we received the allocation for the regular 2021 LIHEAP grant, and we received $199.1 million in California. We do anticipate receiving supplemental funding under the American Rescue Plan, which is estimated at $250 million for California. CSD, we have not received that funding yet. Next slide, please. So once CSD receives the funding, talk a little bit about how we allocate the funds. So we retain 5% for planning and administration. The remaining funds are allocated statewide to the 41 local service providers that we partner with. We use a formula that factors in low-income population, energy costs, heating and cooling degree days. And each of the local service providers receives their total allocation of LIHEAP funds based on this formula to provide core services and activities. And the core services are utility assistance. And utility assistance is for gas and electric and wood, propane, and oil customers. It also provides weatherization, as I mentioned, and emergency heating and cooling and disaster services. Next slide. So as you can see, this graph shows how we allocate the funds based on the various core services and activities. So you can see we typically allocate 25% of the LIHEAP funding for weatherization services and about 44% for utility assistance, and the remaining is allocated for local administration for support, which includes the intake, the outreach and service coordination, and other core energy services, as I mentioned, the emergency heating and cooling, wood, propane, and oil, and disaster services. As you can see under the CARES Act program, we did allocate more funding towards the CARES Act program and other core services. In total, we're estimating there's approximately $70 million currently available under the LIHEAP program specifically for utility assistance, which includes remaining funding under the CARES Act program, some funding under the 2021 and 2020 regular LIHEAP program. Service requests for LIHEAP early on in the pandemic were slow, likely due to the emergency protections that were in place. However, we are starting to see an uptick in applications and increase for utility assistance. Our local service providers prioritized the CARES Act funding early on in the onset of the pandemic, and we are expecting to deplete those funds here fairly soon. LSPs, our local service providers, will continue to prioritize the CARES Act funding and the regular LIHEAP funding to provide the much needed financial relief for utility assistance to the customers. CSD does not know how much will be allocated for utility assistance under the supplemental funding under the American Rescue Plan. Based on LIHEAP, based on how you can see how LIHEAP is allocated, you can see that funding for utility assistance remains limited, even with the supplemental funding that is anticipated. To put that into perspective, if you could go to the next slide. To give you an idea on the funding limitations, in federal fiscal year 2019, the local service provider network served approximately 223,000 low-income households, of which approximately 216,000 households received utility bill assistance. and that's assistance for gas, electric, wood, propane, and oil. So as you can see from the graph, LIHEAP utility assistance services are limited in comparison to the investor-owned utility customers with energy utility debt. We reviewed data from the 2019 LIHEAP program, because that was the most recent program that has been closed out, to compare the extent to which LIHEAP utility assistance might help serve customers in debt. We looked at the total number of customers that received utility assistance. A couple things to note. Utility assistance accounts for all energy sources. Again, it's just not only gas and electric, it's the wood, propane, and oil. And also, LIHEAP services are statewide, so it's not limited to the investor-owned utilities. We work with about 41 utility companies in the state, which does include the investor-owned utilities. So with that said, the amount, as you can see, with the amount of LIHEAP households that receive utility assistance in 2019, it still falls far below the number of investor-owned utility customers in debt for gas and electric. To put that in further perspective, if, for example, if looking at the 2019 data, statewide data, LIHEAP bill assistance data applied to the IOU customers only able to serve less than 6% of those customers and only offset their debt by 8%. So next slide. Now that you have a little bit better understanding of the funding limitations under LIHEAP utility assistance, I'm just going to briefly touch on the eligibility and prioritization to shape an understanding on how services are prioritized, again, giving the limitations of the funding, and we can't serve all households in California that have a need. So the objective of the LIHEAP utility assistance program is to provide a one-time financial benefit to offset the household's utility bill, to provide financial relief, to prevent disconnection and restore services. An applicant's eligibility is based on several criteria. For our program, we set the income eligibility at 60% state median income, and which is a little closer to the 200% federal poverty level. The applicant has to be responsible for the energy costs. The applicant also has to be eligible a California resident and a permanent legal U.S. resident or qualified alien. And specifically, that applies, LIHEAP does apply the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which does require that our public agencies verify that an applicant is a United States citizen, national, or alien in a qualified immigration status. The Act does grant certain exemptions for nonprofit organizations. And so prioritization, the way that we prioritize our services is that we, prioritize applicants based on their income. We take a look at their energy burden, and also, households with a member who is disabled or elderly or have a child under 5 in the home are prioritized for services. Under the CARES Act program, we did add an additional priority that extended prioritization to households with a member who experienced an employment impact resulting from COVID. Next slide. So it's utility assistance, there's two types, one for crisis and one for non-crisis. Non-crisis applicants coming through are not at risk of being disconnected, but they need a little help with their bill. And so under that program, the average benefit is about $335. Applicants coming through that are in crisis are at risk of being disconnected, and we can provide under our program up to $1,000 in a LIHEAP benefit. The amount of the benefit is really based on the amount needed to resolve the crisis. So if the applicant only needs $800 to prevent disconnection, they would receive up to $800. The average benefit amount for the crisis program is about $500, and that's the current average. So as you can see, the challenge customers will face soon when the moratorium is lifted is that even with the $1,000 LIHEAP payment that can be applied, it may not prevent customers from being disconnected. And given the fact that LIHEAP funds are limited, it's really important that LIHEAP serve as many customers as possible, and that wraparound services are considered for these customers. Next slide. So just, ways that LIHEAP, may be able to be leveraged with other programs. I'm just going to focus on the arrearage management plan, is through coordination between CSD, the utilities, and the local service providers. One example is if a customer with large balances exceeding $1,000 comes in seeking LIHEAP services, there's opportunity for our LSP to refer that customer to the investor-owned utility to enroll. Once the LIHEAP benefit is applied, we apply $1,000, they still have a $500 balance. We have an opportunity to then enroll that customer in the AMP program to take care of the $500 that is still past due. As a suggestion, it would be ideal if our local service providers had the ability and the means to, once the LIHEAP benefit is applied, that then they could seamlessly enroll them into the AMP program to resolve the remaining balance. Another opportunity for leveraging is, customers are currently enrolled in AMP and they still need help with their current charges, or they may be past due by one payment. We have, a customer comes in, we can, take care of their current charges and their past due amount, and it really protects them by keeping them on the AMP program, keeping them enrolled. So just in closing, with the mounting arrearages and limited LIHEAP funds, it's essential that we, continue our coordination efforts and, develop some strategies to, ensure that we provide a strong safety net for the customers facing the arrearages. And so that concludes my presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And it looks like I have a little bit of time left to take any questions or comments.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Kathy. So I'm going to first move to, I'm going to start our Q&A by asking if our commissioner's offices present have any questions. Any commissioner offices present that want to ask a question of Kathy? And hearing none, I'm going to turn to attendee questions. Julie, do we have any questions from the Q&A for Kathy?
Yes, we do. Question from Richard Estebes. Which programs provide assistance for arrears in water services? Are those water services available equally both to public water systems or to investor-owned water companies?
So my focus today was on the LIHEAP Utility Assistance Program. CSD is expected to receive funding for a new low-income water assistance program. We have not received those fundings yet, the funding for that yet. The funding is coming from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So I'm not able to provide any details around that program at this time. But just know that, and the funding is going to be very limited. I know nationally, it was, I believe it was 638 under the first bill and 500 million under the second bill. So again, funding will be limited for that vital services, but we're very fortunate to have that program coming to California soon. So stay tuned. Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer any questions specific to that program at this time.
Another question from Connie Cho. What does it mean for CSD to say a customer is at risk of disconnection versus not at risk if both are in debt? And does it depend on what utility they have?
It does not depend on what utility they have. The way that we define our crisis program is that fast track, if a customer comes in and they have a past due amount, or they have a disconnection notice, or services are already disconnected. So under those three criteria, a client qualifies for crisis services.
Okay, another question from David Chang. Does CSD plan to use the same eligibility requirement for the American Rescue Plan Act dollars? Does CSD have discretion to modify those eligibility requirements for American Rescue Plan Act dollars?
Good question. I can't answer if we're going to modify, but typically our LAHEAP program has always allowed for income eligibility to be set at 150% federal poverty level or 60% state median income. We in California have always elected to use the 60% because that provides higher income households to receive services versus the 150% income requirement. LAHEAP also requires that we prioritize services to those who are elderly, disabled, and families with small children. So I would expect that the dollars coming in would adhere to those sort of income requirements and prioritization requirements.
Thank you. Next question from Olivia. Is CSD considering allocating less than 25% of the ARPA supplemental for the low cost weatherization so that more will be available for bill assistance in light of the public health crisis? Under the LIHEAP statute, up to 15% of the state's LIHEAP grant can be directed to low-cost weatherization, but a state can request a waiver to direct up to 25% to weatherization.
Correct. And I'm not able to answer that at this time, but definitely there is a significant need for utility assistance, definitely. And you know, I know weatherization is important as well because for the higher energy burden households, it definitely can help more on a long-term aspect. So, you know, weatherization, you know, really complements providing the utility assistance to the customer. So, you know, once the funding comes in, you know, we'll have to see what guidance we receive from HHS. I do know that our state regs require that the state go out to seek a waiver from HHS to seek the 25% for weatherization services.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We really appreciate you being here. So next on our agenda, we have a representative from HCD here to discuss their emergency rental assistance program. I'm not certain if we have them on the event yet. Justin, I see them.
They are. Just make them a panelist, Ben. So we're good to go.
Okay, perfect. So we have Kristen Haney of the California Department of Housing and Community Development here, and I'm going to turn it over to Kristen whenever she's ready.
Hi. We had a little trouble signing in, so it was a little bit of a rush here right before I got on. I'm glad to join you today, and I do have a PowerPoint I threw together a little bit just to give you some background on what's happening.
Sorry, Kristen, you ended up being on mute. Is the PowerPoint showing up correctly?
I can see the PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Who's advanced
Start
that?
on.
Is that you, Justin? Yes.
Yes,
Great.
I am.
Okay. If you can move on to the next slide. I didn't review all of the legislation. I think probably you're all familiar with, what's been going on. There's federal and also state laws that have been passed that has provided us with funding for both rental assistance and for utilities. So with these grants that were divvied up in different ways to the different cities and counties based upon population, there's 3 different options, and each individual jurisdictions could make their own decisions about how they want to proceed, if they want to run the program, if they want the state to run the program. And so there's different hybrids. So each of these options occur based upon what those jurisdictions are comfortable with and the way that they operate within their counties and their cities. Sometimes, the city, there may be a city with a large population that may make a different choice than the county, which makes it maybe a little bit confusing, but so that's part of the dynamics that are going on. Okay. The next slide. So here's an example of some of the cities and counties. Now, this is an older list, and it's kind of fluid, and there's more and more adjustments, and sometimes a jurisdiction might choose option C, and then they might determine that it's too heavy a lift for them to manage, so they might opt into a different alternative. So regardless though of if you are a renter or someone who's behind on your utility bill, when you go into the websites, which we'll talk about in a minute, there's a quiz to help you determine where you need to apply. And so there's assistance to help you with that, because this is impossible to find out exactly, where, which jurisdiction was which category your jurisdiction selected. Okay, so we go to the next item. Then we'll just kind of review quickly about the state's program. So the primary focus is for rental assistance. Sorry about that. And that is kind of the first line of addressing the funding. We are having the eligibility is based upon the AMI, and the residents can submit it for rent, for utilities, or of course with utilities it could be combination, because in some rental agreements there are some utilities that are covered within that rent, and then the landowner is responsible for paying off those bills as well. Okay. And also too, the tenant needs to confirm or state that there is a COVID-19 impact as opposed to general unemployment issues. Okay. So the next slide, please. So for utilities, when a utility claim is approved, it can be up to 100% of that claim. The tenant it's a different structure. So this is significant because utilities is at a higher level. But again, if we're talking about utilities as part of the rent, then it's back to that 80% of the reimburse of the amount owed. So let's say you owe $3,000 in rent, and that includes some utilities, like maybe water would be included in that rent. Then the landlord would receive up to 80% of that reimbursement, and then he or she would have to cover the other 20%. If, in contrast, there's a utility, let's say a gas company, They will owe $200 and they're paying off utilities, then it'll go the 100% of the arrears based upon the funding available. Let's see. If the landlord declines to participate, which they can, then they will only get up to 25% of the funding to be reimbursed. So that will come to the landlords at a 25% rate. So there's an incentive for landlords to accept the 80%. And the reason why I explain this to you is because it can impact utilities, and depending on how the utilities are packaged for the renter, which are, I've learned, all over the place. Okay. I only have a few minutes, so I'm going kind of quickly. Why don't we move to the next slide? There's also a partner network that's been established to reach out to communities. There's a number of organizations throughout California, and they will focus in communities, focus with various languages. And so there's been a really strong effort to be able to do that and to assist people. And they're able to sit down with, our residents, to sit down and help them fill out the application if they need assistance. So that's another opportunity that we've developed and pushed forward out there. Okay, next slide. And hopefully everybody's been hearing some of the efforts in the media. We've done a big media campaign. I know cities and counties have done that as well in other jurisdictions, but there's been a lot of messaging out there. I know articles in newspapers for those who still read newspapers. But there's been a lot of a big effort in marketing to let people know about this, because there's such a short window to get all this done. Okay, next slide. Anyway, this is basically the highlights. Is we're taking the multiple languages, making sure it's accessible. I'm going to have you go to the next slide, I think, Justin, because that was just kind of, there's too much language there, but it's available. They're available for people to see that when an applicant needs to, when they're going through their the funds that are due to some entity, they do get this page, and it says this is the utility assistance application, and it walks people through exactly what needs to be done and the information they need to receive. One of the things that also needs to happen is the claimant needs to submit how much they owe, give the information so that it can be evaluated. We want to make sure we're providing funding, one time to the right person, and making sure all those dots are connected. We go to the next slide. Justin, I think I said Jason last time by mistake. This is just a real quick recap of the application process, where the tenant always has to start the application. So once the tenant does that, then it goes to the landlord and the utilities. We are still working out some of our processes with the utilities, because the utilities work in a different way than with the landlords. So there's a few issues we're still working on, and we'll be updating our websites as that makes progress. The way to find out this information, though, is we have two different websites you can view. One is Housing is Key, and that's the one where you really go in as a resident. You can go in and pretend you are one and that had something in arrears, and then you see how it works, and maybe just not finalize it. The other place to look is at the hcd.ca.gov website. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom where it says what's new, there are a lot of items in what's new. If you go to the center column, and the first item is the COVID-19 update, and then it says learn more, and that's where you can find a lot more information. And as more information is available for utilities, that's where that information will be provided. Okay, next slide. Anyway, since I know that this is something for each of you to view, I just kept the slide in here so you'd have an opportunity to see some of the other areas that are the information, and we even referenced the CPUC. So Okay, on to the next slide, and that's pretty much the big overview of what we're doing. Really quickly, is there any? I'm sure there are questions, but can I answer any questions for you?
Before we move on to questions, Kristen, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I did want to clarify, we received one more question for the previous speaker from a participant regarding whether customers should wait to apply for the CSD program. And since I don't think we have Kathy anymore, we'll follow up with her directly for that question with the person who asked it.
I'm here.
Oh, Kathy, we do have
Yeah,
you.
I'm still here. I still know.
Okay.
I wanted to hear about the HCD program.
Oh, wonderful. Kathy, the
Yeah.
full question was, if we are not doing disconnects at the moment, should they be waiting to apply, especially if this is a one-time financial benefit? Could you clarify what is AMP?
Okay. So I would encourage applicants to apply for LIHEAP assistance. And I say that when I say it's a one-time financial benefit, it's a one-time benefit per program funding. So since we have currently have like CARES Act, that's a one-time benefit under CARES Act. There's, if they come in and they still need assistance, you know, there's also funding under 2020 LIHEAP and 2021. So there's multiple funding streams to assist the customer throughout the year. So I would encourage them to come through to seek assistance. And was the other part to clarify the arrearage management plan and the way that I was describing some leveraging opportunities?
Yes.
Okay. So if a customer comes in and like the one slide indicated they have $1,500 that they need help with, our program, if they're eligible, can potentially apply up to $1,000. So they still have a $500 debt that needs, you know, they still need help with to prevent disconnection. Then we can refer them to the IOU to sort of coordinate the enrollment into the arrearage management plan. So then now that $500 is taken care of through that program. So now the customer really has a strong safety net and provided the financial relief to prevent disconnection. The other concept was a customer already enrolled in AMP. They need a little help with their current charges and their past due, and past due meaning under the AMP program, they couldn't make one of their payments. So now they have their current charges and past due, and now they're at risk of being kicked out of the AMP program potentially. So LIHEAP can provide that security by applying, providing a LIHEAP benefit to take care of their current charges and their past due, and now they can still be in the AMP program and continue.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Okay, thank you.
Glad you were available. I'm going to move to Q&A for Kristen now, but before I turn to Julie, I have one question that we received in advance from Commissioner Guzman Aceves for Kristen. She asks, I saw in your slide deck that participating utilities will be compensated 100% of unpaid utility arrears from April 1, 2020 through March 31, 2021. If a landlord declines to participate, eligible households can still apply for and receive 25% of back rent owed for the covered period. However, utilities are still at 100%. Her question is it correct that all renters subject to eligibility conditions like 80% AMI, COVID affected, and have arrears who pay their utility bills directly, including water, would qualify for having 100% of utility arrears paid off? What are the limits to that forgiveness for either individuals or across the entire program? So a long question, but just is that correct? Oh, and you're on mute, I think.
There we go. Sorry about that. I said that was a well thought out question. Yeah, I'm sure you couldn't read my lips. I think that the hardest thing is going to be the first thing is paying rents with this program. And so exactly when that utilities payments are going to start kicking in, that part's a little bit up in the air at this point. Your scenario, though, of somebody who the landlord doesn't participate, but there's a separate, so those utilities that are covered with their rent, that's that limitation of the 20%, 25%, you have that right. But maybe there's other utilities. It could be, broadband, could be, water as your example, then that could be 100%. But as far as, the funding, we'll have to see how much far the funding goes and if more funding comes in. It's a possibility. So I think there's such a huge demand, and the way they've done it is they've tiered the funding to go to, based on the county so that it's more evenly distributed. And then once there's claims filed, then they'll start to kind of reshuffle it based on where the need is, because some counties have a stronger need than other counties based upon the area and how COVID has impacted California. And we know that it's been not equal within the state. So that's why it's kind of hard to answer the question. So that's why also utilities is down the line a little bit farther as far as when things start to get paid.
Okay, great.
Let me add one more completely different thing. One of the things too is we've been meeting with some different, large and small utilities providers, and working out some more of the kinks too about how that all happens. Because in contrast to the rental situation, a landlord signs up and then they, once the tenant signs in, then the landlord signs in. There are so many utilities. It's so complex in California. And so we're still working on some process issues. So that's where looking at checking the for the FAQs every once in a while. And I noticed today that the FAQ's not posted, even though I thought it would be by now. So I already sent an email to check, for those FAQs, but you might want to check periodically.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm going to turn now to Julie. I think we have question for maybe one or two, time for maybe one or two questions.
Yes, the question is from Shauna Lazaro. Is there any way to ask this question? Okay, do you know if CSD has flexibility in the new incoming funds to include people who are not able to discuss their immigration status?
Is that a question for somebody else or for CSD?
I believe that was for CSD. This is
okay.
Kathy Andre.
Yes.
Did you want me to hold off to allow opportunity for Christine's question?
Yep, let's move to another question for Kristen real quick, but we'll follow up on that one directly, maybe.
It's fine if you want to take that one first. I don't care. I'm not pressed for time.
Okay.
So go right ahead.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I cannot say that we will have flexibility around the verification of citizenship requirement. It's a federal requirement under Heap. So I would assume that the same requirements would apply for the new funding coming in.
Okay. Julie, do we have any questions for Kristen that we can ask at this time? And you might be on mute.
Yes, thank you. What support is provided to members of the partner network so that they can assist customers?
Okay. There are over 200 organizations in the local partner network that have established a relationship for this project. And I know that they're out. My understanding is there's a lot of activity. I cannot even explain it, but I know there's a lot of activity with it. And there's efforts for sitting down with people from the community and assisting them with filing a claim. There's also some webinars that they're doing and other things. So there's a number of outreach opportunities and, you know, local intervention, I guess is the right word. Does that answer the question?
That question was from Melissa Casnet. We could go on to the next question, and if she responds with another, I'll let you know. How does Cdhcd verify whether a household experienced a COVID-19 impact as part of the program eligibility requirements?
I'm going to be honest, I am not completely clear on that. And what I can do is, because I've been more on just the utilities part, not that, I am happy to circle back to you and get that information to you on exactly what their process is. I'm not certain. All I know is there's the confirmation, the claim for it, and I know that there's a process, but I don't know the details to be able to share that with you.
Thank you. Another follow-up question: are the CBO's partner organizations paid?
Are the who?
Are the partners CBO organizations paid?
You meaning the local partner networks?
I believe so.
Okay. I know that they entered agreements, and yes, there was funding that came with these federal and state funds to compensate these networks, for their assistance. So yes, there is some financial support for these organizations.
Okay, and we are now past time and have taken even a little more of Kristen's time than I think we had budgeted. So I'm going to have to say thank you to all of our panelists for this session, and maybe move on to our next panel, or our next, event, which is just going to be instructions for this afternoon's work team. But again, thank you so much to Kathy Andre and Kristen Haney for being with us this morning and sharing all of that incredibly useful information. Justin, do you want to put the instructions on the screen?
Hey, Ben, are the instructions on the screen?
They are. Perfect. The rest of today's workshop is dedicated to allowing teams to meet amongst themselves to complete the criteria and proposal exercise and discuss and refine proposals in the designated 5 proposal areas. Before we break for lunch, we wanted to provide some last instructions before participants break into these teams. These instructions are posted on the preceding website in the same place where the final agenda and the presenter slides have been posted. Each participant who contacted me indicating they wanted to participate in the work teams this afternoon should have received a calendar invitation with your team's number, the proposal area you will be working on, and a list of other group members. That calendar event also includes the WebEx link that you will use to meet within your groups. If you intended to participate in this afternoon's work teams, but have not received a group assignment and/or corresponding calendar invitation, please contact Julie Lane so that we can get it sorted out. If you have already contacted me this morning, which is a couple of you, I will update your meeting info once we break for lunch, so you do not need to contact Julie. According to our agenda, teams are scheduled to begin convening at 1:00 p.m. and last until 4:30 p.m., with an afternoon break from 2:30 to 3:00 p.m. But teams should, of course, feel free to take breaks and rearrange schedules as necessary. Once you are assembled in your teams this afternoon, we're going to ask you to follow the following order of operations. First, introduce yourselves, describe your interest in the proposal area that you've been assigned to, and describe your organization's affiliation. Secondly, members of the team should volunteer for the roles of facilitator, which will be responsible for reading these instructions, moderating discussion, and guiding the group through the steps of the criteria and proposal exercise, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as the roles of note taker and presenter. These roles may be shared between group members as well. For instance, if 2 members want to share note-taking responsibilities, that's fine. But we do want to spread out the responsibility across members of the team. Finally, we want you to perform the criteria and proposal exercise that's identified in this handout. So that exercise, the criteria and proposal exercise, is intended to help structure the discussion between participants across these proposals and identify common points of agreement or departure between different proposals. The intent is for each team to have a completed criteria and proposal table, which is shown below on this document, to guide presentations tomorrow. At the beginning, we will encourage individual team members, and Justin is showing that this is the table that I just mentioned. At first, we encourage individual team members to provide their opening positions on criteria and proposals, and we do encourage everyone to keep an open mind and work to find common ground that meets the needs of Californians. These instructions, as I mentioned, are posted on the preceding website under the final workshop agenda and work team's assignment bullet. So to begin with the criteria and proposal exercise, teams should identify and define up to 6 key criteria for an effective proposal. Some examples include the simplicity of participation from a customer perspective, feasibility of implementation, so how effectively can the utility implement it or a given public entity? Is it fair? Is it equitable? What is the impact on customer behavior, whether that's payment, the likelihood of incentivizing customer payment or some other aspect of customer behavior? Does the proposal leverage existing programs and funding, or is it non-duplicative? And does it mitigate cost shifting to non-participating customers? But of course, these are only examples, so you should feel free to use these or use other criteria as your team desires. Once criteria have been identified, team members should identify proposals within your topic area. These proposals can be newly developed or previously proposed. And following the identification of proposals, teams should assess those proposals using the criteria that the team has selected. These should be assessed using simple descriptors like high, medium, low, yes or no, 1, 2, or 3. This is intended to be a simple rating exercise. We want to focus discussion on where the proposals compare directly to each other, rather than devoting too much time to precisely grading them all in this setting. Once criteria have been assessed for each proposal, teams should consider modifications of proposals or combinations of different proposals that can address potential shortcomings or improve a proposal's performance along your selected criteria. As proposals are combined or eliminated, please update your table accordingly. And these discussions should be moderated by the facilitator who volunteered at the beginning of the session. Groups should try to present no more than 3 proposals, given our time constraints, but may present more if you're unable to come to an agreement. Just to demonstrate how this table is intended to work, I'm going to ask Justin to fill in a couple of boxes for illustration purposes. So we have here our table containing criteria that are yet to be defined and some proposals that will be under consideration. So for our first proposal, and this is purely for illustration, I'm going to suggest forgiving all arrears over $2,000. And for my second proposal, I'm going to suggest forgiving all arrears more than 6 months late. Or actually, to make it simpler, I'm going to say putting everyone more than 6 months late on a 12-month payment plan. Perfect. And then for my first criteria, I might suggest simplicity from a customer perspective. And by this, I just mean how easy is it for the customer to understand the program. In this case, I would say that this is that the first proposal is highly simple. The second proposal, maybe I would suggest for purposes of illustration, is only medium simple. Perhaps I think that the payment plans are a little more complicated than a one-time payment. And then for my second criteria, I might suggest something like effectiveness in preventing disconnection. So for giving all arrears over 2,000, again, purely to illustrate, I could say that this is medium effective, since customers may have lower arrearages but still face disconnection. And I might say that the 12-month payment plan has a low effectiveness, again, purely for illustration, if I think that customers who are at risk of disconnection might not be able to keep up and pay back that entire arrearage. So again, nothing that I've said here represents this is purely for illustration, but this is the kind of exercise that we are asking the teams to go through with your proposals to identify which criteria certain proposals are more effective on, which ones they're less effective on, and how some of these proposals can be combined to leverage those strengths. I think I'm going to pause there. And I believe, unless there are anything else from my fellow panelists, I think that may be our lunch break. I can pause if my fellow panelists have any questions about what I just said or want to clarify. Okay. Hearing none, I think I'm going to declare lunch break and the end of our session number 2. And looking forward to hearing from everyone's work teams after this afternoon's sessions. And those will convene at 1 o'clock.